Hello and welcome to Rao's IAS DNS session. Today we are going to take up some explained article from the Indian Express and some article from today's The Hindu. The article that we have taken for today's discussion are there on your screen. We aspire to have detailed discussion on these topics fulfilling the demand of civil service examination. Let's begin with this explained article, 10 years of POSCO, an analysis of India's landmark child abuse law. POCSO came in force in 2012. So it has been more than a decade and it is quite right time to do analysis of the law. Before we get with the analysis, we'll do a little bit of basic as to how the scenario progressed towards a dedicated law against child abuse. There have been many international coalitions and conventions against child sexual assault. Geneva Declaration of 1924 was the first in series. This Declaration of Geneva recognized that humanity owes to the child the best it has to give. However, back then, the declaration considered children as an object of protection instead of holders of rights. And in general, the declaration was directed towards men and women of all nations. So it did not put any obligation on the member state. The declaration essentially was non-binding. Then in 1959, United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration of Rights of the Child. The declaration recognized the need for the protection of children against all forms of neglect, cruelty, and exploitation. But still, the declaration was non-binding. In 1966, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 10 of this convention recognized that children and young persons should be protected from economic and social exploitation. But however, the child right and protection from abuse was really strengthened in 1990 by United Nations Convention on Right of the Child. It was the first legally binding instrument that recognized children's right. There was an optional protocol to this convention, Convention on the Rights of the Child. The convention was on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. This was adopted in 2000. Protection to children against sexual assault also comes from United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime. The protocol to this convention is about prevention, suppression, and punishment of trafficking in persons, especially women and children. In 2002, Convention on Prevention and Combating Trafficking in Women and Children for Prostitution was adopted by SARC. The aim was to take collective measures against all forms of children and adolescent sexual violence. For protecting child's right and protecting our children against sexual abuse, these three conventions are very important and India is party to all three. The Constitution of India also guarantees a right to children. The Constitution gives a child the right to live with dignity, the right to personal liberty, the right to privacy under Article 21. There is right to equality under Article 14, right against discrimination under Article 15, right against exploitation under Article 23 and 24. Many of the directive principles of state policy protects right of a child, especially Article 39F. It makes an obligation on the state to ensure that children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity, and that childhood and youth are protected against exploitation. However, despite these strong constitutional provisions and the international law framework, child rights traditionally have lacked legal backing in India. The criminal laws that worked even after independence, they failed to recognize sexual assault and exploitation of children as separate offenses, and the legal system continued to try these cases under generic provisions for offenses affecting human body and sexual offenses. See, the offenses under IPC, these provisions fell short of addressing the complexities, the social impact, the mental impact of sexual exploitation of children. In cases of sexual exploitation of children, child witness, sometimes they are the only witness. But under the criminal trial procedures in the Code of Criminal Procedure, even as amended in 1973, These criminal procedures do not take into account child witness because it is considered that child can be tutored easily, and many a times what they say is more imaginative and exaggerated. So account given by child witness generally in criminal procedures are not given weightage. But you understand, in cases of sexual offenses against children, many of the time they will be the only witness. You can understand the level of emptiness in the law concerning the abuses of children from this case of a state of Punjab versus Major Singh. Here, the High Court of Punjab, while addressing an appeal in the child sexual case, said that a girl of 7.5 months does not possess womanly modesty, and therefore the provisions of IPC, which deals with assault with the intent to outrage the modesty of women, won't apply to this case. So there was legal vacuum concerning child abuse cases. Many of the Law Commission report has recommended amendment to IPC, especially the 172nd report of the Law Commission recommended a major amendment to section 375 to include all forms of forced sexual assault under the offense and widen the scope and make the section gender neutral. In the early 2000s, there were many sex rackets of children busted, especially in the state of Goa. In 2007, a report was published by Ministry of Women and Child Development called as the Study of Child Abuse. And this report identified the gravity of the issue. The study of this report found that nearly 50% of children have faced one or more sexual abuse. And contrary to the general perception, the overall percentage of boys reporting sexual abuse experience was much higher than that of girls. So finally, after much of discussion and deliberation, in 2012, the POCSO Act came into effect. Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. Let's see some of the important features of the Act and then we will do the analysis of the Act. The Act gives definition of children, and according to Act, anyone below the age of 18 years is a child. Previously in IPC, the consent for sexual relation can be given by a minor above age of 16 years. So when we analyze the case, we will take up this point again of this difference of 2 years, 16 and 18. The Act was made gender neutral as was recommended by the Law Commission of India. And we also talked about, as the survey done by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, abuses faced by boys are overwhelmingly more than that of girls. We have talked in the beginning that the criminal procedure before the enactment of Act does not take into account the social and the mental impact of child abuses. So as a course correction, the Act brings the concept of child protector. One of the policemen involved in the investigation process will act as the child protector. For timely delivery of justice, the Act stipulates that the case must be disposed within 1 year from the date of reporting. To enable this, Act also has provided for the establishment of special courts for the trial. And to monitor the progress of the case, National Commission for the Protection of Child's Right. This is a statutory body established in 2007. And this has been established under the Act of the Parliament called as Commission for Protection of Child's Right Act 2005. So this is statutory body, National Commission for the Protection of Child's Right. This acts as the monitoring body for the progress of child abuse cases under the POCSO Act. The Act also says that POCSO Act will override the provision of any other law, including the IPC, to the extent of inconsistency. In the cases of conflict inconsistency between two laws, the provision of POCSO law will prevail. So as we have talked about here, the IPC recommends 16 years above which a girl or any minor can give consent for a sensual romantic relation. But POCSO, according to this act, everyone below 18 are child, and sexual relation with a child will a rape whether or not the consent was given. The act also had the provision that mandatory reporting has to be done. When anyone is of our knowledge, any offense, any abuse against children is either going to happen or already has happened. If the person is carrying this knowledge, then he or she has to report it. Not reporting is also a crime. The special court after the trial can give compensation as relief. The Act has called for establishment of Vulnerable Victim Disposition Center, meaning a special room, a special place where disposition, the victim's account, will be recorded, so that secondary victimization of the child does not take place. So everything has to be done in a calm, separate environment, taking into consideration the mental state of a child, especially after sexual abuse. Now let's come to the analysis of the POCSO Act. I have broken down the analysis into various segments, and this will be a general framework for analysis of any law. Any law that the government of India comes up with must strengthen the rights of people. So you will see in the analysis as to what rights previously were not there or were loosely there that has been strengthened by the new legislation. The new act must strengthen the rights in some ways. Then you have to see whether the entire legal ecosystem has been improved for those provisions of the law to take effect effectively. Meaning the ancillary laws, for example, the Evidence Act, has that been changed so that the evidence under the sexual abuse for children can be taken, accommodated easily? Is there a provision for online account by the doctors, by forensic agent, so that the process gets expedited? Any inconsistency with the law, for example, the provisions of IPC, has that been changed? So that should be the immediate second step after giving the provisions, the ecosystem, how that accommodates the provisions of the law. Then you'd put some hard facts regarding implementation of the provisions. Then you talk about the justice, the rights that were given, how much of that has been realized, meaning how the justice has been delivered. What I intend to say here is in implementation, we can talk about the provisions that has faced challenge in implementation. And finally, what is the percentage of conviction? How many cases have been reported? What is the geographical variation in that? Things like that will count in final justice delivery. Then you talk about different kind of challenges that has impeded the implementation of the law. Physical infrastructure challenge, legal challenge, challenge of awareness, human resource, technology, all sort of challenges. And based on the above analysis, you will give the recommendation that which also becomes a part of overall analysis of the law. So let's come to the first part. The law as such strengthened the right of child. You know that very well. Many new provisions were brought about where the sexual abuse was made gender neutral. There were provisions for timely justice delivery. It had to be done within 1 year of reporting. There were many other provisions that strengthened the justice delivery. For example, there's a provision of compensation and rehabilitation. If we talk about the overall legal ecosystem, that was changed or some of the provision that was liberally interpreted by the judiciary. As we have discussed previously, in the traditional criminal procedures, child witness is not given much weightage. But the Supreme Court, via various judgment, has fixed the matter like this. Conviction in POCSO cases can be based on the sole testimony of the child victim as long as the victim's evidence is reliable. Now, this is a change in legal ecosystem. You have made this change to accommodate the provision of the law more effectively. Unless you do this, the law will be rendered useless. POCSO Act also forbids the name of the victim to be disclosed, the name to be discussed anyways in the media. And the investigating officer must protect the crucial information, the personal information of victim and the family from any sort of media. But you know that this is violated both by the media and the public officials. Supreme Court in this regard, in Nipun Saxena versus Union of India case, has given strict guidelines, ruling that the identity of a victim child is not to be disclosed to the public. In Section 7 of the POSCO Act, as such, you don't have to remember this, but you have to know that in the POSCO Act, there's a concept of sexual intent. So traditionally in the criminal procedures, the high courts, they were interpreting the sexual intent from skin to skin contact. In one of the cases, the Bombay High Court acquitted an accused on the ground that there was no skin to skin contact. But the Supreme Court, via its judgment, has said that the sexual intent is not only to be decided by skin to skin contact, but any sort of touch, even with the intention of doing sexual assault later, will fulfill the touch requirement under the Act. Now, that has to be obviously proven that the accused had a sexual intent, but the concept of sexual intent, which the legislation referred by skin to skin contact, was broadened by the Supreme Court. Now, this is what I'm talking about. To make your law effective, there has to be changes brought in the legal ecosystem. And largely, that is the job of judiciary, to liberally interpret the laws and to have harmonious construction in the legislations. But then there are certain lapses. For example, in the Act, the definition of a child is anyone below 18 years of age. That is biological age. The biological age of the victim to be considered under this Act has to be below 18 years. But there have been many cases where the biological age is much more, say 30, 35 years, but the mental age is less, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, for specially able people. So because of this technicality, Those cases are not tried under POCSO, and the Supreme Court is yet to give a clear verdict on this. We have discussed this already that any sexual intercourse by a man with his wife who is below 18 years of age would amount to an offense under POCSO Act, even if the minors had any kind of romantic relation. There was an exception to this under IPC. So Supreme Court in its judgment has favored the POCSO Act and has said that for a girl below 18 years, it does not matter whether the consent was given or not. Any sexual intercourse will be counted as rape. And just after an year, this act was enforced in 2012. In 2013, Parliament of India brought a very important law, Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013. In this, many provisions of CRPC and IPC was changed. And in this amendment, the age of consent was also increased from 16 to 18, basically changing the provision of IPC that was coming in clash with POCSO Act. So the legal ecosystem, as you can see, were effectively changed to favor the provisions of the Act and hence enabling its effective implementation. But despite this accommodation by the legal ecosystem, the implementation has been far from impressive. In the pre-trial phase, there has been delay in filing of charge sheet. The support person that the Act calls for the victim in all phases are not appointed. All the districts in India still today do not have these special courts that the Act calls for the trial of POCSO cases. There have been lack of special public prosecutors for these special courts. And the timeline that the Act has set for 1 year, that is far from being met. Even the compensation provision, that is not given by the special courts. And at all stages, it has been observed that the awareness of POCSO Act is less in administration and even outside administration. Even though the Act clearly says that whenever there is inconsistency, the provision of POCSO Act will prevail. But you know that the policemen, they are trained more in IPC. So despite this provision, they have the propensity to go with IPC. And the nature of criminal procedures under IPC and CRPC, that's how the officers in the law enforcement are molded. So special provisions of POCSO Act that is not getting fulfilled. If we look at the final outcome in terms of justice delivery, on an average, it takes around 510 days for POCSO case to be disposed of. The legal requirement is 365 days. The rate of conviction is very less. For every one conviction in POCSO Act, there are 3 acquittals. And as per this recent report, only Chandigarh and West Bengal, they are the only states or the UTs where the average time for conviction is within the statutory prescribed period of 1 year. Rest all the states, they are failing to meet this target. There are many challenges, as you can understand, in implementation of the provisions. The infrastructural challenge, the special courts have not been formed. There are many legal challenges as well. Section 19 of POCSO Act makes reporting of the acts mandatory. The provision makes it mandatory for any person who has apprehension that an offense under this act is likely to be committed or has the knowledge that such an offense has been committed. He or she has to report the offense to the local police or special juvenile police unit. Now, this provision is criticized. Many studies have found that it makes it difficult for children to seek support because of fear of registration of a police case. The age of consent in the POCSO Act is 18. Many recommendations have come to reduce the age of consent because very high percentage of cases for acquittal are those where the minors are involved in romantic relation. And out of vengeance or grudge, the family filed these cases under POCSO Act. So maybe the minors were under relationship, but any such act has not happened, and one of the family is trying to frame the other person in the relation. That is one of the reasons of high acquittal rates in these cases. So the recommendation that you can give here can be these. Obviously, first of all, awareness about the POCSO Act has to be increased to ensure that a comprehensive and holistic approach to sexuality education, including information about sexual offenses, they are introduced to young children in a subtle manner so that the reporting to the cases can increase. Students have to be made aware of the mechanisms available to them to report these cases, any case of sexual abuse happened to them or their peers. You can also give this as a recommendation to reduce the age of consent from 18 to 16 years so as to prevent the criminalization of any romantic consensual relations and also to ensure that the act achieves its intended objective to protect children who are actually victims of sexual offenses. It can also be considered to adopt some leniency in certain cases regarding mandatory reporting. Since POCSO Acts call for mandatory reporting, which often leads the family to face social stigma and suffer embarrassment. So, a leniency can be adopted in some cases in order to safeguard people who are getting punished for the mere reason for not informing to the concerned authority. But maybe at social level, they can be of a lot of help. There should be a time limit for disbursement of interim compensation to the victim. The disbursement presently is done only after the time of appeal is expired. But it is recommended by many that some interim compensation can be given to the victim. The POCSO Act calls for establishment of vulnerable witness deposition centers. But these deposition centers, where the child victim will be at ease giving the depositions, giving the account, these have not been established. They must be established in all POCSO courts. It's very essential to provide a safe environment for recording the testimony of child victims of sexual abuse. It's important to prevent the re traumatization of victims. The special courts have not been established in all districts, and even when they are established, the adequately trained special public prosecutors are not there, especially they must be present exclusively for POCSO courts. As we have discussed earlier, the support person in every POCSO cases are not there. Effort must be taken to make them present at all phases of trial. And the counseling support, even for the judges and prosecutors, apart from the victim, should be there. As the final word in the analysis, we can say that the provisions are there to strengthen the right of child, safeguard them against any sexual abuse. The legal ecosystem also has broadened itself to accommodate the provisions of POCSO. But the implementation has not been very impressive. In terms of justice delivery, the Act has not performed very well. The implementation, both in terms of infrastructure and in terms of legal provisions and in terms of statutory timeline set by the Act, has not been met. In a decade, the legal ecosystem has done well, but now the implementation and actual justice delivery must also pick up. This is another explained article that we are going to discuss. Although the article discusses more of as to why millet is not gaining traction in India, but considering the importance of the topic, we shall discuss the topic of millets in detail. Millet, you see, is a common term to categorize small seeded grasses. And lately, they are also being termed as nutri-cereals. They also are sometimes called as dryland cereals. The common form of millets, as you would know, are jowar, also called as sorghum, bajra, pearl millet, ragi, finger millet. This is a categorization of millet of some grasses called as small millets. Foxtail millet, POCSO millet, barnyard millet, kodo millet. Kodo millet actually originated in India. It is the only millet that we consider to have origin in India, and it is very well suited for tropical and subtropical regions. Kodo millet has one of the highest drought resistance. You must know that India is the leader in production of millet. For a very long time, there was no parallel to India, but now Nigeria and China are catching up. And these three countries alone account for 55% of global millet production. In India, after rice, wheat and maize, pearl millet is the fourth most widely cultivated food crop. Although there are a wide variety of millets cultivated in India, but the three major ones are jowar, bajra and ragi, or to say sorghum, pearl millet and finger millet. Although in terms of various varieties of millets, there are various states which are leading producers. But overall, if you talk about millet as a general category, Rajasthan is the absolute leader in production of millet, followed by Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. Also Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana also produce millets. It has been quite some time since we have discussed the topic from perspective of various GS papers. We'll do that exercise once again today. We'll talk about the need for promotion of millets from the perspective of various GS papers. Beginning from GS paper 1, we'll talk from the perspective of first geography, then society, and then culture. You know that around 60% of India's agricultural land is rain dependent. And large areas, as you can see in this heat map, they are arid, semi-arid. More clearly, you can see here the region that falls into the category of arid or semi-arid, that is a large percentage of India's landmass. Also, in terms of land degradation, if you see in this map, the areas that have been recently seen land degradation is large. The degradation has happened because of various reasons like water erosion, because of water logging, because of salinization in the region of Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, also because of wind erosion in the western part of India. So these are geographical constraints and problems of Indian landmass. And hence promotion and production of millet suits very well to the tropical location of India apart from the constraint of being monsoon dependent. If you move further into the syllabus of GS paper 1 after geography, you will find the syllabus of society. In the syllabus of society, you will find a topic poverty and developmental issue. And very often questions are asked from this section of poverty and developmental issues. From various studies, it has been seen that there exists a proper linkage between millet production, poverty reduction, malnutrition alleviation, and rural development. The linkage will become more intuitive and visible to you as we move further into our discussion. See, there are different sources for poverty estimation in India, and various sources have given the numbers between 37% and 77%. For example, Tendulkar Committee pinned down the number to 37%, 42% of poverty in rural India, and 26% in urban India. The Saxena Committee gave the number as 50%. Arjun Sen Gupta 77%. World Bank has estimated 42% of Indian population to be living below the standard international poverty line that was of $1.25 per day in terms of PPP. And if this line is increased to $2 per day, then the percentage of population shoots to 80%. In terms of multidimensional poverty index of United Nations Development Programme, 54% of Indian population are poor. Associated with the issue of poverty is the issue of nutrition, and the nutritional status is also very poor in our country. According to the recently released data of National Family Health Survey 5, you would know that more than half of children and women are anemic in 13 states. There has been increase in the childhood stunting from the data released in National Family Health Survey 4. Prevalence of blood pressure, hypertension has also increased. And lifestyle related diseases like being overweight or obese, their prevalence has also increased both among children and adults. Millet production is said to solve this problem of poverty and the problem of malnutrition. First of all, millets are drought resistant. They require very little external input in terms of chemical fertilizers, water supplies, and other inputs like technological inputs. So the cost of production decreases. They are also highly nutritious. They are rich in iron. They are richest in calcium. So they are good source of both food security and livelihood security. Because growing millet is easy even in rain-fed areas, especially in remote areas among the tribal population. Millets has dual purpose of both food and fodder. Agricultural productivity has very strong linkage with overall rural development. Indian Council for Agricultural Research has reaffirmed in various reports the power of agricultural productivity in reducing rural poverty. It says that 1% productivity increase reduces rural poverty by 0.65%. And agricultural productivity for millets can be increased very easily because of very little external input required. Millet also has one cultural aspect related with syllabus of GS paper 1. It has long history of production in Indian subcontinent. Reference of millets can be found in various mythology, poetry, religious practices, even in Ayurvedic recipes and various Indian dishes. Millets still today, they are a very important part of socio-cultural fabric in various societies in India. Now let's jump from GS paper 1 to GS paper 3. We'll come back to GS paper 2 after this. In GS paper 3, we'll touch two areas, economic development and environment. Under the syllabus of economic development, you'll find this topic, major crops. And in the topic of major crops, you'll find various subtopics. One of the subtopic is cropping patterns in various parts of the country. So definitely you have to cover millet in this topic of major crop because as we have seen before, millet is the fourth important food crop in India. So let me tell you a little basic. First of all, millets are photo insensitive. meaning they do not require a specific period of sunlight for flowering. And millets are generally thermophilic. They grow better at higher temperature. And they also are xerophilic because they can grow well even in the condition of limited water availability. In contrast to millet, if you look at other important food crops in India like rice, wheat and maize, wheat is highly thermally sensitive and it demands a very narrow range of temperature for growth. If that is breached, the production of wheat is adversely affected. But millets are so good, they have no such demands. Pearl millets, they can actually grow in a very poor soil condition as well. They can grow in sandy soils because they can absorb moisture from the soil very effectively. In the category of small millets, we have talked before, kodo millets, which has its origin in India, they can grow very well in adverse climatic and soil conditions. Millets, you must also know, follow the C4 photosynthesis mechanism. So their ability for carbon sequestration is high. So they actually contribute towards reduction of carbon dioxide. In contrast, if you see, paddy is one of the major contributors to climate change. Methane emission from the paddy field is very high because of rotting of organic matter beneath the water-drenched rice fields. Also, wheat and maize, they also have very high global warming potential. Millets, they do not attract pests and hence they are relatively much free from diseases, which also means that millets can be stored for a considerable amount of time under appropriate storage condition, making them famine reserves. Millets not only have lower carbon footprint, they also have low water footprint because the input demand for water is less. Rice needs actually 3 times more water to grow in comparison to millets. And when India has to support 15% of world's population with just 4% of water resources on earth, production of millet could be really helpful. In terms of economic development, we'll also talk about economic parameters. For example, employment. Millets are largely grown through traditional methods, although technology will help in the post-harvest process. But largely it employs traditional method for cultivation. So the employment support is higher. Millet cultivation can also prove to be sustainable income sources because of lower input cost and less sensitivity with respect to climate or weather. Capitalizing on production of millet will also help in the export because in Africa, 40% of the food demand is met by millet. And there's a big market for millet export in Africa and otherwise. When you do cropping pattern in the major crops within economic development of GS paper 3, you should note that millet has a short growing season of around 65 days. It can vary, it can go up till 135 days. But relatively it has a shorter growing season. And this allows it to be part of multiple cropping systems, both in rain-fed areas and irrigated areas. Also, as we have discussed before, millets more effectively sequestrate carbon. So it is very helpful for the other crop and hence can be utilized in intercropping system. Now we come to GS paper 2. In GS paper 2 syllabus, you'll find this topic, issues relating to development and management of social sector or social services relating to health, education and human resources. We'll focus on this part of health, and in health we'll first do nutritional security. You must know that millets have higher levels of protein and they have more balanced amino acid profile. They also have higher dietary fibers and these two means that they are easily digestible, very helpful for both children and aged people. They are also rich in B-complex vitamins like niacin, thiamine, riboflavin. They also are source of methionine, the essential sulfur-containing amino acid. Not only vitamins, they are also good source of minerals like iron, folate, calcium, zinc, magnesium, phosphorus. They also are good sources of antioxidants. Ragi, for example, is known to have highest calcium content among all the food grains. Millets also have very high iron content, and this can be strategically used to fight the prevalence of anemia. Millets also have phytic acid, and it is believed that phytic acid help in lowering the cholesterol level in body. Millets have nutrients like phytate. It is believed that phytate help in reducing the risk of cancer. You know, millets are gluten-free. Gluten are found in very high amount in wheat, and they have low glycemic index. Glycemic index of a food crop or any food indicates how they affect the blood glucose level. Low glycemic index means when you eat it, your glucose level in blood will not spike. So they are very beneficial for diabetic patients. Since they are easily digestible because of high fibers, they also are helpful for gastrointestinal disorders. Since it also controls the blood pressure, so it also helps patients with heart ailments. We have seen before that it has antioxidants. So if there is oxidative stress in the body leading to death of the cell and other complications, millets will also help in that case. We have already seen it has high iron, so will help in anemia. It has B complex vitamins like for example niacin, so it will help in pellagra and various other vitamin deficiency related diseases. Now I'm doing a little bit of extension because in GS paper 2 you also have international relation. You know, from 2013 to 18, India exported about 15.4% of world's bajra to around 60 countries. And you must know that more than 40% of global millet consumption happens in African countries. Also because of its nutritional value, the food which are sent to war-torn areas, volatile areas, Yemen, Syria, even Myanmar, India can become an effective supplier of food, exporter of food to these countries. This will help engaging more with the African countries, compete better with China, and increase our soft power in West Asia, in some parts of Europe, and in some troubled areas in Asia. But the production of millet in India is gradually decreasing in terms of cultivated areas and also in terms of total production. Productivity although has increased for millet, but total production and cultivated area has decreased. Millet for a long time has been seen as poor person's food. It has been victim of policy neglect. Very little production support has been given to millet as was given to rice, wheat during the Green Revolution and to a certain extent to maize. Technological support for cultivation of maize is very little. Technological adoption for post-harvest process, although the government has tried by coming up with a scheme in 2012, but the post-harvest technological adoption still is very low. There is problem with remunerative prices. Although it has been included in the MSP regime, but the remuneration offered there for millets are low. It also has been seen that there has been changing preference in the consumption pattern even in the rural areas. Some suggest it has been because of transmission of culture, changing culture from the urban areas through the process some terms as Sanskritization. There also has been impact of mass media because of overt advertisement of packed foods. Rice and wheat-based packed foods are becoming more popular. There are very few brands or the formal sector companies working for promotion of millets. But now things seems to be changing. The year 2018 was declared as the National Year of Millets by the Government of India. And the Food and Agriculture Organization also accepted the request of Indian government to observe 2023 as International Year of Millets. Back in 2012, Indian government launched Intensive Millet Promotion Scheme. This was the part of Rashtra Krishi Vikas Yojana. The purpose was to advance the equipment and technology related to millet harvest. Also as part of Rashtra Krishi Vikas Yojana, Rain-Fed Area Development Program was launched. The purpose was to identify new areas which are receiving adequate rainfall for millet farming. Government of India also has given the status of nutri-cereals to millets. It has been included in the system of PDS. Government of India also has recognized millets as anti-diabetic. Recently, MSP for millets was also hiked. Say in 2018, UPSC has asked this question. Consider the following: areca nut, barley, coffee, finger millet, groundnut, sesame, turmeric. The Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs has announced minimum support price for which of the above. So you must know that MSP is given for millets and that includes finger millet. But it's a different issue, only knowing that will not help you solve the question. But if you know that coffee, tea, these two are not included in MSP, their pricing has a different mechanism, then that will help you come to the right answer. Because if you remove the options having number 3, you will be left with only one option. But nevertheless, MSP are given for millets. Government of India is also encouraging millets to be included in midday meal scheme. Because why not? They are so nutritious. And millets are also being promoted under National Food Security Mission. But however, they are not promoted under National Nutrition Mission. There was a question in 2017 prelims examination. Which of the following are the objectives of National Nutrition Mission? To create awareness relating to malnutrition among pregnant women and lactating mothers, it seems obviously correct. To reduce incidence of anemia among young children, adolescent girls and women. There are actually targets given to reduce anemia, and this is also correct. Third statement was to promote the consumption of millets, coarse cereals and unpolished rice. And the fourth statement was to promote consumption of poultry eggs. But there is no such target to promote the consumption of millet or the coarse cereals or poultry eggs. So answer to the question was option A. Let me take you through another question of prelims 2016. With reference to Initiative for Nutritional Security through intensive millet promotion, which of the following statements are correct? We have just seen that through intensive millet promotion, the aim of the government was to advance equipment and technology related to millet harvest. Now let's come to the question. This initiative aims to demonstrate the improved production and post-harvest technologies and to demonstrate value addition techniques in an integrated manner with cluster approach. Verbose but sounding true. Poor, small, marginal and tribal farmers have larger stake in the scheme. Yes, because millets are mostly part of dryland farming. The third statement, however, was this. An important objective of the scheme is to ensure farmers of commercial crops to shift to millet cultivation by offering them free kits of critical inputs of nutrients and micro irrigation equipment. This statement is incorrect 3 times over. First of all, commercial crops are also important. You cannot be encouraging farmers of commercial crops to shift to millet cultivation just like that. Second of all, whenever equipments are given to farmers, they are given at subsidized rate. Free kits like this are not given. And thirdly, we have seen that the millets have very little demand of inputs in terms of nutrients, input in terms of water. So free kits of critical inputs of nutrients are actually not given. But you must know that micro irrigation equipment are given for millet production. It is right. But subsidized support is there for it. And they are not actually free kits. In UPSC prelims examination, you'll find many questions in which you'll find long statements. Those long statements gives you many opportunities to find the loophole in the statements. And most of the times, they are incorrect. Answer to this has to be. Now let's take up a third explained article, Development of Great Nicobar, Strategic Imperative and Ecological Concerns. Last month, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change gave environmental clearance for the ambitious Rs 72,000 crore development project on the strategically important Great Nicobar Island. The project is to be implemented in 3 phases over the next 30 years. There's a plan for a whole new greenfield city, including international container transshipment terminal. There's a plan for greenfield airport, new power plant, and a township initially for personnel who will be implementing the project. First, let's look into the strategic importance of Andaman and Nicobar Islands in general, and then we shall be looking at the ecological concerns.
The maritime importance of groups of islands in Andaman and Nicobar is very high, both in terms of trade and surveillance or strategic significance. Andaman and Nicobar Islands account for 30% of India's exclusive economic zone revenue, and a lot of it has remained untapped. That is why there's a call for infrastructure development in the island. India still does not have a transshipment hub facility. Because of that, most of the large ships bound for India either go to Colombo port or the Singapore port. And from there, through smaller ships, goods comes to India. If a large port facility developed for transshipment is developed in Campbell Bay, which is an appropriate location identified for that, this is in Nicobar, then India will have better trading opportunity with ASEAN nations. It will also help to improve India's relation with ASEAN region in alignment with India's Act East policy. If you look from the perspective of surveillance or strategic importance of island, it is also very high. India's only tri-service command is there in Andaman and Nicobar Island. It is there at the entrance of Malacca Strait. Malacca Strait is very close by to Nicobar Island. UPSC asked this question in the prelims of 2017. Which of the following is geographically closest to Great Nicobar? Sumatra, Borneo, Java, Sri Lanka. See, here is our Andaman Nicobar Island, and the Nicobar Island is very close to Sumatra. This is the Java Island, this is Borneo, and here we have Sri Lanka. The distance, as you can see, is closest from Sumatra. But the Strait of Malacca is not very far by. Shipment of oil coming from the Persian Gulf passes through Strait of Malacca and then it goes to Hong Kong and China. This is a very important trade route, and developing Nicobar Island transshipment port at Campbell Bay will be very significant in this regard. Also, you would know this region is developing as Chinese sphere of influence. China is pushing for Kra Canal in Thailand. It is a canal that will run right through Thailand, making way for ships so that Strait of Malacca can be bypassed. After the Doklam, you must be aware that Chinese influence and incursion towards the eastern coast of India has increased. Chinese scorpion has been found as close as Sumatra Island. From security point of view, developing the tri-command that we have at Andaman and beefing up its infrastructure at Nicobar is very important. Development of such a base will also help in functioning of Quad. Also, you will understand one thing. When you develop civilian infrastructure that has positive externalities for overall infrastructure. So if we want infrastructure for surveillance, if we want to develop our strategic infrastructure, trade infrastructure, infrastructure for tourism, etc. must also be developed.
National Board for Wildlife has denotified the Galathea Bay Wildlife Sanctuary, the entire sanctuary. This was done on 5th February 2021. This denotification of the Galathea Bay Wildlife Sanctuary will ease the stringent environmental regulation. Let me first show you where Galathea Wildlife Sanctuary is. This is the Galathea Bay and this is Galathea National Park. The sanctuary is within the national park. The Galathea National Park is in the Great Nicobar Island. In the northern Great Nicobar Island, you also have Campbell Bay National Park. Great Nicobar Island is the southernmost island of Andaman and Nicobar Island group. The southernmost point of Great Nicobar Island is the Indra Point, which is the southernmost point of Indian territory. If you observe in the map, you will see the proximity of Great Nicobar Island with the Sumatra Island of Indonesia. Now coming back to the news. Galathea Bay Wildlife Sanctuary has been denotified by which body? By National Board for Wildlife. I must tell you that denotification of any wildlife sanctuary or any national park requires recommendation of National Board for Wildlife. This provision is there within the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Also, you have to know that approval for this, for denotification of wildlife sanctuaries and national park, that must also come from Supreme Court. Supreme Court, via its order in 2000, has directed that there shall be no de-reservation or denotification of national parks and sanctuaries without the approval of the apex court. So what you have to remember for the prelims exam is this. The request for denotification that can come from the state government via State Board for Wildlife. But that request ultimately has to be cleared by National Board for Wildlife. And that must also be accepted by the Supreme Court. In case of tiger reserves, the request for any alteration of boundaries that has to be cleared by National Tiger Conservation Authority. And then it has to be approved by National Board for Wildlife. So what you have to remember is state governments, they cannot denotify a tiger reserve or a national park or wildlife sanctuaries. But definitely they can request the center for denotification. Now bring back your focus here. Galathea Bay Wildlife Sanctuary has been denotified. Problem? Many problem. First of all, there seems to be inconsistency in the plan, outlook, the policy of government. On one hand, you are denotifying a wildlife sanctuary. On the other hand, you are declaring the same as important marine turtle habitat, an important coastal and marine biodiversity area. Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has recently released Marine Megafauna Stranding Guidelines and very important National Marine Turtle Action Plan. This was released towards the end of January 2021. On 28th of January,
Denotification of this wildlife sanctuary happened on 5th of January. But when denotification happened, National Marine Turtle Action Plan was already in the final stage of draft and was about to be released. But perhaps National Board for Wildlife was completely unaware of this. So the wildlife sanctuary was denotified, but the same wildlife sanctuary was declared as important marine turtle habitat. Allow me to digress just a little bit. Because National Marine Turtle Action Plan has been released for the first time, it becomes important for the coming prelims examination, and you have to prepare turtles under the list of important faunas. The most important turtle in the context of discussion on Great Nicobar is giant leatherback turtle. Giant leatherback turtle and Nicobar megapode, these two are the most important charismatic species of Great Nicobar. In the context of olive ridley turtle, you must have read that these turtles, they do mass nesting at the mouth of rivers, important rivers of Odisha like Rushikulia, Dhamra. Similarly, at the mouth of river Galathia in the South Bay, giant leatherback turtle does the nesting. And this perhaps is the reason why Galathia Wildlife Sanctuary was declared in 1997. For the coming prelims examination, you must know that there are 5 species of turtles in Indian waters. Olive ridley turtle, green turtle, loggerhead turtle, hawksbill turtle, and leatherback turtle. Out of these 5, olive ridley, leatherback, and loggerhead are vulnerable in the IUCN Red List. Hawksbill turtle is critically endangered, and green turtle, they are endangered. For leatherback turtle, you must remember they are the biggest of all the 7 turtles found all over the world. They are found all over the oceans except Arctic and Antarctic, and in the Indian Ocean water, they are found to be nesting in Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So in India, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are the only nesting site for leatherback turtle. Apart from leatherback turtle, there is another very important endemic species in the Great Nicobar called as Nicobar megapode. First of all, you must know that Nicobar megapode, they are unique to the Nicobar Islands. They are not found anywhere else apart from few islands of Nicobar. It has been categorized as vulnerable in the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. Megapode are kind of birds similar to chicken, but they have nesting site on ground. This is how it looks. After the wildlife sanctuary was denotified on 5th of January, no time was lost in approving the zero extent ecologically sensitive zone for the Galathia National Park. It was done on January 18. See, eco-sensitive zones, they are ecologically fragile areas within 10 kilometers around protected areas. So it's a kind of extended protection given to areas around national parks and wildlife sanctuaries. It is declared via notification by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and it is done within the provision of Environment Protection Act 1986. Remember that this limit of 10 km is not very stringent. Eco-sensitive zone can extend beyond 10 km as well. The basic aim is to regulate activities that will be detrimental to the fragile ecosystem in and around the protected areas. Once the Galathia Wildlife Sanctuary does not remain a wildlife sanctuary since it has been denotified already, so it became easier to also declare it as zero extent ecologically sensitive zone. Government via notification can reduce the extent, meaning from 10 km the extent can be reduced to 8 km, 6 km, 2 km. It can also be reduced to 0. That is called as zero extent ecologically sensitive zone. Effectively, it means that it does not remain ecologically sensitive zone. That also has been denotified. The only problem with that is when the notification was in the draft stage in October 2020, it talked in great detail about the park's ecological uniqueness. For instance, it is part of UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has one of the best preserved tropical rainforests in the world. It has rich reserve of flora and fauna. And there are some important species like Nicobar wild pig, Nicobar tree shrew, Nicobar crest serpent eagle, Nicobar paradise flycatcher, Nicobar megapode, as we have talked about this. For the coming prelims examination, you must know the IUCN status of these species. And you must remember that Nicobar megapode has vulnerable status and Nicobar tree shrew has endangered status. The draft notification also highlighted that the park is home to indigenous Shompen community. But despite highlighting these facts, Now the area around the Galathea National Park has been declared as zero extent ecologically sensitive zone, meaning the status of ecologically sensitive zone has been taken away. But however, the area still remains under Coastal Regulation Zone 1. Similar to ecologically sensitive zone, Coastal Regulation Zone governs human and industrial activities close to the coastline. ESZ was for area in and around protected areas. CRZ is for area along the coastline. Coastal Regulation Zone is also declared by Ministry of Environment, and this declaration is also under the provision of Environment Protection Act 1986. The zonation is done into 4 categories 1, 2, 3 and 4. Areas under Coastal Regulation Zone 1 gets the highest protection. So this inconsistency in the policy, this is a serious issue. Furthermore, there is an official document, Champagne Policy of 2015. This document highlighted that the particularly vulnerable Champagne community, this nomadic community, lives in the area where the projects have been proposed. The official stand then in the document was this: welfare and integrity of these people should be given priority with regard to large-scale development proposals in future. And it also mentioned then, such as transshipment port, container terminals. But perhaps now the stand has been reversed. Side by side, I must also tell you that for the coming prelims examination, you must be aware that in Andaman, you will get 4 important tribes: Andamanese, Sentinelese, Zarawa and Ongs. In Nicobar, you have 2 important tribes, Champagne and Nicobaris. And must I also tell you that Andamanese, Sentinelese, Zarawa, Ongs and Champagne, these 5 are also particularly vulnerable tribal groups. You must remember, Nicobaris, they are not particularly vulnerable tribal group. So among the 6 tribes that you remember for Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Nicobaris are not particularly vulnerable tribal group. The rest of the 5 are. Further, if you go ahead from ecological, environmental and sociological tribal concern, there are also geological concerns. But one study of 2019 has cleared the area to be fit to be chosen for port development. It said that the topography of the island is best suited, which has not been damaged even by the tsunami of 2004. But however, the counter argument is loss of life and property back then was limited because Great Nicobar coast was largely uninhabited. But now when you are doing investment and you're creating infrastructure and you will do property construction, then obviously you will make life and property as socially and geologically vulnerable. There is a report by Earthquake Engineering Research Institute which says that when the coast of Nicobar witnessed 8-meter high tsunami, the lighthouse at Indra Point, the southernmost tip of the Great Nicobar Island, was on high ground. But now the same point is underwater. There has been land subsidence of about 3 to 4 meters. The region is definitely geologically vulnerable because Andaman and Nicobar Island, as you would know from your geography knowledge, they are the southward extension of Arakan Yuma range of Myanmar. This is how the underwater extension of Arakan Yuma range has happened. Arakan Yuma range itself is extension of Purvanchal Hills, and Purvanchal Hills themselves are extension of Himalayas. So definitely this region is going to be geologically vulnerable. The Andaman and Nicobar Island, this region, it lies in the subduction zone. There are 3 subduction zones here. Look in the map, this is the Sumatra subduction zone. Here we have Andaman subduction zone. And then towards the north, we have Arakan subduction zone. Because of these subduction zones, the Andaman and Nicobar Island, the entire of it, they are highly prone to tsunami. Environmentalists are pointing out that environmental impact assessment has not been done before beginning with the execution of the plan for holistic and sustainable development of Little Andaman and Great Nicobar Island.
There is an article in the FAQ section in the Hindu, Preventing Suicides. What is the new strategy? Well, the new policy on suicide that the government of India has come up that already has been discussed in the DNS. Here, I would like to take up a case study with you on suicide from the perspective of GS Paper 4. It's a simple case like this. Many recent studies have shown a spike in the suicide rates in India, which has become a matter of concern for the Indian society. In fact, India has one of the world's largest suicide rates for the youth aged 15 to 29. Suicidal deaths have gone up many-fold in many states, and most are being done over spur of the moment and in some cases over trivial issues. Analyze this problem in detail from different perspectives and indicate various social, psychological, and economic factors responsible for the problem. Also, distinctly bring out why suicide rates are high, especially among the youth. Why suicide rates are high even in some developed states like Sikkim, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu. What steps can be taken to stop the youth from taking such extreme steps? Although I would have loved to discuss this case, but it will take 15 to 20 minutes and this DNS has already become very lengthy. So what I'll do is I'll leave you with the case. You try it out yourself. If you post the answer in the comment section, I'll definitely give you the feedback there. Thanks for being with me. Goodbye. Take care.